Good afternoon. It's a beautiful summer day here in Chicagoland, which is where I'm calling in from. I hope this finds you well in your part of the world or part of the country. But welcome to Otus in 30 minutes or less, where we're going to give a very high-level overview of the Otus platform. And we're going to do it rather quickly in 30 minutes or less. I always like to err on the or less side of things. Obviously, this is a webinar. You can't see me, you can't see one another, but you should be able to hear me. And if you hear me, that's great. I can't hear you. So if someone walks into your office, your phone rings, or if you start talking to someone, that's all good. You won't disrupt anyone on our end. If you do have a question, please type into the Q&A option on Zoom that we're all very familiar with nowadays, and know that this is being recorded. So after this session, I'll share out the recording and you will be able to pass that along to other folks. So before we jump into the Otus platform, just a little bit about myself. So my name is Keith Westman. I'm the COO here at Otus and have been here for little more than 8 years. However, prior to coming to Otus, I spent much of my professional life working in schools. And so I've held a variety of different roles. When I was in the classroom, I taught third grade, but ultimately have worked in building and district level leadership roles. And I'll try to bring those experiences into today's presentation as we go, but I'm not unique at Otus. I think it's well, hundreds of years of collective experience in K-12 education for across all of the folks at Otus. So if you have any questions, again, feel free just to chat them in or type them in, and I'll be able to answer them the best I can. So what is Otus? Essentially, think about Otus as being a place to get answers to your most important questions about how your students are doing. So that's a very high level, what in the world is Otus? Well, let's get a little more granular. So one of the primary reason that we created Otus is because as educators ourselves, we are finding that we were using 10 or 12 different disconnected tools in order to get our jobs done as educators, whether we are classroom teachers, building leaders, and district administrators. A lot of things are fragmented, and it's really hard to create that holistic picture of student performance. So how do we do that? Well, first, we give you ways to use Otus to start to get to insights on how your students are doing. So one of the ways that Otus can be used is a place to give students formative or summative assessments. Now, these can be teacher created, but they can also be pre-built, and we're going to talk about those in just a minute. So just a place to give assessments to students and for the educators to analyze the results. Another great use case for Otus is if you're implementing standards-based, competency-based grading. Because we also have assessments in Otus, and we can align those assessments to standards, we have a really neat way to visualize how students are doing on standards. But if you don't use standards-based grading and you're using a more traditional grading points-based approach, that's cool too. And we also have a nice way to provide you with a hybrid model where you are kind of living in both worlds, giving that standards-based detailed information, but presenting it in a way that may be more comfortable or more consistent with where your community is at. Otus can also bring in data from external places. So if you think about your state assessment, ACT, PSAT, NWEA, iReady, the list goes on. All of these different assessments you have on students, we can bring that into Otus, because as you can imagine it in your mind's eye, you're starting to have all of these different ways that you measure or know about how students are doing coming together into one place. And then ultimately, we want you to be able to use that data and that information to do things, to make decisions. This group of students needs a certain intervention, or we want to track this, we want to track their career college readiness. We want to use that data to give kids a plan and track their progress over time. So high level, that's what Otus does. When a district brings Otus in, they don't do everything right out of the gate. That's a big change that, there's evolutionary change and revolutionary change, and evolutionary change tends to go better. So usually when folks bring in Otus, they're looking to solve like a certain primary issue. Like we just need our data organized from all these vendors we use, or we're trying to implement standards-based grading, but we're getting stuck because our student information system doesn't have a great way to present that data. Okay, so I have a question that came in. Can you use the standards-based grading and present the info to students without using the common assessments? So we can make paper assessments and still use your standards-based grading program. The answer to that is yes, and we're going to get into that in just a moment. Okay, before we jump into the software, so I talked about giving students assessments in Otus. So those assessments those questions can be created by questions from an educator's brain. But we also have partners. So if you use any of these curriculum partners, we have the assessments that go along with this curriculum pre-built in Otus, aligned to your standards. And so students can take these, Otus grades them, organizes all that data for your teachers and staff. We also have other pre-built assessments. We have these, we call them Otus proficiency assessments. They're just short assessments, K through 8 in ELA, reading and math. For grades K through 2, they're 5 items. Through grades 3 through 8, they are 10-item assessments designed to be used regularly to, measure student growth on specific standards. You can also create assessments that aren't already built for you, but you can use pre-built, pre-aligned items to create your assessments. 100,000 plus items, K through 12, ELA, math, science, social studies, aligned to your standards. Finally, a lot of tools that you already use or you may be comfortable using that are fully integrated in Otus, but let's dig in, let's play around. So this is Otus. I'm going to log in first as a teacher, but I want you to know that teachers can use Otus, students can use Otus, families can use Otus, administrators can use Otus, but I'm going to log in first as a teacher. And now notice I'm going to log in with my Google account. A couple things we're looking at as a teacher, and I'll keep it really simple. So there's things on the left that you can click, information in the middle that you can read, and a to-do list on the right. Super simple. As a teacher, if I click on classes, it's going to show me the classes that I teach. How does Otus know this? It connects to your student information system. So Otus will sync with your student information system, put the right students in the right classes. Okay, that's important. The reason that's important is because now when you're going to analyze all of this data, you don't have to worry about getting what class is the student in. You can bring in things like if they're an IEP student, if they're ELL, so different student groupings, demographic information, all get synced from your student information system into Otus. And so that means when you're analyzing data, you can look at it in some really cool ways. So let's talk about those. Let's talk first with that standards-based gradebook. So I'm going to click over where it says gradebook. And this is what we're looking at. If I use just in living in just a traditional points-based grading environment, the Otus gradebook looks like any other gradebook that you've seen. We're not doing anything special here. You're literally seeing, okay, on the Unit 7 summative, Frank got an 89%. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this because you've seen it a million times before. Whether it's an Otus or any other system, they're all pretty much the same. But what's unique to Otus is that the standards view of the gradebook is also there. So what are we looking at? Kids that are in my ELA class. This total grade is optional. You don't even have to use this feature. I'm going to talk about what this is doing in a minute, but if you're looking at this and you're saying, Keith, standards-based grading, we don't want ABC, this would be ditched. Don't even worry about that. I'll tell you what it means though in a moment for those of you who are living in a hybrid situation. But here's what we're looking at. So here are the standards that we have assessed in our class. So we're only going to display the standards that have been assessed. We're not going to display every possible standard for third grade because why? Overwhelming, too much information. And if you haven't assessed any of those standards yet, your parents are like, well, what's going on? Why aren't you teaching everything that they need to know in third grade? Well, it's the second week of school. We haven't gotten there yet. So Otus is only going to show the standards that have been assessed. So right now, I'm using my grading scale is exceeds, meets, approaching, not at standard. Just so you know, you can use whatever grading scale you want to use. Some people use 4, 3, 2, 1. Some people use awesome, not awesome, amazing. This is just my grading scale. So what I'm looking at is Frank has been assessed on this standard 7 times. That's what that number 7 is telling me. And he's currently exceeding. If I click on that cell, it will show me all of the different times that Frank has been assessed on that standard. Where does this come from? It comes from Otus. Either your students are completing an assessment in Otus, and Otus is going to grade it and plot it out, or if you don't want to use, let's say you're doing like a discussion or a paper assessment, there's the option, this we call it a plus assessment, to say, here's a paper assessment. And this is kind of cool. So we're going to link standards to it. Now, we don't have the expectation that every educator in the world remembers every standard that they're assessing. So Otus comes preloaded with, that's my Siri, of course, answering unasked questions. Otus is going to come preloaded with the standards that you use. So Common Core or not, your specific state standards, NGSS standards, or if you have custom standards, those can be loaded into Otus. But here's what's cool for teachers. Let's say they do use, I'm a teacher who does use Common Core. Well, I don't remember what nonfiction, I don't remember like CCS, ELA, but I can just type in a keyword and that will narrow down the standards so that I can link one or more standards to this assessment that I'm going to give. And then I'm just going to, manually, quote unquote, manually say my students all met, except there are a couple differences here. So if you don't want to give assessments in Otus, you can also just manually enter something into Otus and it plots it out for you. Again, keep in mind your grading scales can be different than what I have. You could even have different grading scales for different grade levels. So that brings us to another question. So here's Can you show the total grade in traditional as letter grades? Can you show individual grades in traditional as a letter grade and not a percentage? So yes. So basically, you can display letter grades, number grades. I even think emojis work. Not that anyone would want to do that, but basically you're calculating student performance and you're displaying it in any way you choose. So here's a question. How in the world, you've assessed this standard 10 times. How are you calculating that Frank is exceeding? We give you options. So there's different ways, you can use average, most commonly occurring, most recent, highest decaying average, which, you're weighing the more recent attempts heavier. It actually should be called more recent, heavier than the earlier attempts. But you'll notice that if I change these calculation methods, the look and feel of our graphs may change as well. So you can have one or more of these options available to your users, whatever you think. Okay, let's look at those assessments though. And I'll keep this relatively short. I want to give you some examples of an assessment that I created. So they're not assessments that go along with any curriculum provider. So think about it as there's really 3 types of assessments. The first type is called a simple assessment. We modeled it after Google Forms, a very quick and easy way for teachers to create assessments that Otus can grade. These can all be aligned to standards. Kind of showed how that was done a little earlier. What's nice about these? Really easy to create. What's not nice about these? You're limited to true, false, short answer, and multiple choice questions. It's not awesome. It's awesome for lots of folks because really easy to create, but not awesome for everyone. So let's think about a math teacher who I don't know, I taught 3rd grade, so I can't speak too much about like algebra and things like that. But let's say we need more intricate, more, maybe tech enhanced questions, maybe questions that mirror your state assessment. Next type of assessment is something called advanced assessments. And why are they called advanced assessments? It's because you have like 65 different types of questions you can ask. That's the good thing. What's the not so good thing? They take longer to create. So there's give and take with everything. But as you can see, all sorts of different options. Again, you have the Desmos tools, these different calculators and equation editors, all sorts of different options for you. And then finally, my favorite, which is called rubric assessments. So this is where that integration with Google gets really neat. So if you have, if I'm an ELA teacher, for example, and I have a writing assignment where I'm going to have, students write a paper, I can have my rubric on one side of the screen while I'm reading the Google Doc that the student submitted. If I need more screen space to leave comments, I do it just like I normally do. But when it comes time to evaluate or grade it, I can open up my rubric. And if I need more room for the rubric, I can actually see the standards that have been aligned. And again, it doesn't have to just be a Google Doc. So students can upload videos, they can upload, audio files, really whatever you want. But it all flows into that grade book. So regardless of how we are assessing students, that is flowing in to our grade book and organizing that data. So what's cool about this is this view that I'm looking at is not limited to just teachers. So administrators have this type of insight. So do the students. The students are going to see exactly how have I done over time, and the families. So what's nice about this, thinking about my father, super old school guy from the north side of Chicago, he's not, he would have no idea what standards-based grading is. And I wouldn't even want to explain it to him. It'd take a year. If we're going through standards-based grading, we're at least saying, hey, here's what they need to know. Here is what this whole thing, this CCSS thing means. This is what we want Keith to do And here's how he's been doing it as he's been practicing that skill. So just trying to get that information to folks in a way that makes sense. Is it possible? Okay, another question came in. Is it possible to have different grading scales in different subjects? I'm going to say yes with an asterisk, and I'd want to just learn a little bit more about what that looks like. Before I navigate away from this, if you do give the assessment in Otus, your users can click on those points in time and actually see the question that was being asked of the student at that time. All right, let's talk about like bigger data. So as a classroom teacher, so I've, given students assessments in many different formats. I've looked at their performance on standards, but that doesn't really tell the whole story of a student. So another thing I mentioned that we can do is we can bring in data from these different assessment platforms that you use. So this is a demo system. I have a ton of different assessments in here. You're not going to have this many. You're going to have 6 or 7 assessments. I just want to give you an idea of the options you have. But what's cool about this is as a teacher, I don't need to log into, NWEA or iReady or some other system to look at like our state assessment results. I can look at this information directly in Otus, and then here's where it gets cool. I can say, well, who are those 5 kids who scored in this way? And I want to create a group of students, and I'm going to call it It's July, just for the heck of it. I'm going to call this group of students It's July, because now I can say, all right, I don't want to look at how my students did on, we'll look at the Minnesota State Assessment. I don't want to look at all of my students and how they did on the Minnesota State Assessment. I just want to look at those students who are in that group that's called It's July. So some cool ways now that we're kind of seeing that more holistic view of student growth in one spot. Another way to do that, we look at an individual student. Everyone gets this profile. So we're seeing that gradebook data coming from those assessments. But we can also see all of that external data. So I'm not having to hunt in different places for it. It's all there for all of the years that they've been with us. So there's no limit on the number of years. So you think about your PLCs and the prep that goes into bringing data to those meetings where you want to talk about things. Otus can be super helpful. Another thing I'd like to share with you from an analytics standpoint is let's say I give my students an assessment in Otus. When I look at the results, of course, I could go look at that standards-based gradebook or the traditional gradebook, but I can also look at some other information. So here's this math assessment I gave. I can see if I gave it to more than one class, how did my classes do compared to one another? Remember we talked about those student groups that we can bring in from your student information system? You can also create your own in Otus. Wow, on this assessment, it looks like my highest scoring group was my tier 2 students. That's interesting. They outperformed my students who are fine arts students. So different ways to kind of look at how students did on assessments. And the teacher hasn't had to do anything in order to create this. It's just we're showing it. You can do an item analysis. You can look at individual student performance, or I can see how did the kids do on the standards that were being assessed on this assessment. So all sorts of different cool things you can do. Now, finally, I'm going to log in as an administrator in just a moment. The last thing I want to show you as a teacher. So we have all of this data, right? And we're wanting to, track how students are doing on an intervention. So we're assessing students, we're analyzing the data, we're saying, okay, now we need to follow this plan for this student. We're trying to just keep that all together in one place. So what Otus has a module called plans, and it's a place to put really any type of behavior plan, reading plan, MTSS plan, whatever it is, reading growth plan, whatever it is, put it into Otus so it can all be tracked across years. And that's what makes this unique. Your plans in Otus travel with the student across school years. So even though your student information system like converts, which you're probably all going through right now, these plans travel with the student on to their next grade level. So here's an example. So here we have Frank. Well, it's not Frank. Let's find Frank. Here's Frank. This is just an example. So a student can use plans to create goals. So here's my academic and personal goal I want for this year. And then the teacher can come in here and say, all right, they are in progress. Parents can also contribute to or review plans. You kind of have some different permissions. A teacher can come in and say, all right, they're at their math foundational level right now is 10. But what's cool about this is these are over school years. So if you have certain things that you like to track over time for students, teachers who have Frank are going to have access to his plan and be able to update it and review it. I'm going to log in as an administrator. So we have 6 minutes left. So, all right. So as an administrator, how am I using Otus? Okay. You can look at everything that a teacher can look at. Look at how are students doing on these standards, okay, whatever. But let me show you a couple special things. A couple reports I want to share with you. So let's say I wanted to figure out who are the kids in our district who qualify for a reading intervention. Well, what I'm able to do is create something called a query. Okay. And I'm going to start saying it's not just their iReady score that we count, that we factor in. It's like a lot of things. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, okay, on iReady, and you can see how easy these are to build. You don't need to like have a special, staff member who's great at programming to, create these reports. So I'm going to say, all right, anyone who on the spring iReady reading assessments, their percentile was, less than or equal to 50, they would qualify. But it's not just that. They also could on, their performance on, this state test or whatever, they scored this way. You get the idea. So you're mixing and matching all of this data, whether it was assessments that happened in the classroom or whether it was, this third party data that you're keeping track of. So once you kind of put your recipe together, you can also do some cool things like can become a matrix where like this is weighs more than something else. You're going to say, all right, well, show me that list of kids. And what we're going to do is not just give you a list of kids, we're going to tell you some information about them. So here are the kids that meet that criteria. Here's the schools where they go. Here's their grade levels. Here's some demographic information. Here are those groups again. All right, looks like our first year students, the students who just transferred into our district, they're the ones who are most qualified for this reading intervention. That's just good to know as you're thinking about PD or whatever. Can also create teacher groups. Wow, look at that. We have more students who have teachers who are piloting the new math series who qualify for this reading intervention than we do who have teachers who went to our school district as kids. So again, just different ways to analyze the data without having to do too much to make this happen. And of course, you can drill into any of these areas. Then the second type of report I'm going to share with you, and then I'm going to take a big deep breath and I'm going to meet my in 30 minutes or less, is something we call a historical report, where it's really comparing student progress over time. So I'll show you an example. So what I wanted to do is I want to look at students who are in their first year in our school district. I want to compare them to students who have been with us since kindergarten, compare them to IEP kids. Also want to look at students of first-year teachers, students who are multi-ethnic, students who are, and I want to exclude, I want to look at all students except for students who are highly mobile. You get it. It's like this different ways we want to look at the data. But I'm looking at how they did on ACT Aspire. Here's how they did on ACT. Here's how they did on Access. Here's how they did on your common assessment you gave. So just different ways to compare student cohorts over time. And again, building these are really, really easy. I'm going to take a big, deep breath. If you have questions, my time is yours, and I'm going to stay here and I will answer those. But if you have to go, because it's 30 minutes or less, thank you for being here. I'm going to follow up with this recording, and you'll also have my contact information. If you're interested in doing a deeper dive, you can just let me know. But I'm going to stick around. I'm going to take a sip of water and a big, deep breath and be able to answer any other questions you have. If you do have to go, though, thank you. But I'm going to stick around. My time is yours. For those who have to leave, thank you very much for being here. I'm going to stick around. I'm going to take a sip of water and a big, deep breath. That's so funny. I'm streaming this to our YouTube channel, and it's like a little behind. So I was hearing myself repeat myself. Question. Okay. Student information. What student information systems do you integrate with, and how do those work? Well, let me talk to you about the biggies. We, first of all, have not found a student information system that we don't integrate with. So 99% chance we integrate with your student information system. And that means rostering students into the right classes with the right demographics following them along. But let's talk about Skyward. Let's talk about Infinite Campus, Power School, and Aries. All of the above, Otus rosters with all of those systems, but we can also do points-based grade passback from the Otus gradebook to the gradebook in those systems. Not standards-based. We're really filling a gap, I think, that exists where with standards-based reporting, but we can report those points-based grades back to those student information system gradebooks. All right, this is an interesting question. How would you use this to help increase test scores and, maybe kind of revitalize a grading program or a data warehouse? Okay, so my view on this is the best way to improve student growth is knowing which students need what and why. Because if we don't understand what students need and why, then we will do what has been, I know I'm guilty of when I was in the classroom. You start doing the same thing for everyone, the same intervention for everyone, but that's not meeting students where they are. So what I'm going to do is just very quickly walk through a scenario. I'm going to talk it out as I do it, how as a teacher, I could use Otus to help me understand who needs what and what am I going to give them. Okay. And I'm going to cross into some areas of Otus that I didn't discuss in our 30-minute overview. Okay. So I'm logged into Otus as a classroom teacher. And what I want to do is I want to say, all right, let me go look at my grade book. And I've assessed, I want to look at classroom performance. So I'm going to look at these bar charts along the bottom of our grade book. Okay, it looks like this standard. This is the one where I have most of my students who are approaching. So this is RL comprehend literacy. Okay, I'm going to take this. I'm going to say, all right, I'm going to create a group called literacy. I'm going to add these students to that literacy group. All right. There's a part of Otus that we call lessons. It's a place for teachers to organize the different resources that they use for math, for example, and put them in one spot. So what I'm going to do now, I know that math and literacy, let's suspend disbelief, but let's say this is my one of my literacy lessons that I've created. I can say, I don't want to give this to every kid in my class, this series of activities. I just want this to be given to the students in my class who are in that literacy group. So right now I've identified students who need support in literacy. I have resources that I'm going to share just with these 2 students. And so I can do that with the different, based on the different needs of the different students. Okay. Now, at the same time, I'm going to say, I also have a reading improvement plan that our school uses to make sure that we're doing the right things to support the students in these areas of need that we've identified that they qualify for. So what I can do is go in at any point in time and say, all right, when we are identify that a student needs support, there's different pieces of data and information that we like to track. And as we are reviewing that, we're able to discuss as a team, all right, how are we doing? How, are our students improving? Are they growing? I can come back to an assessment and say, all right, now that we've been working on this literacy skill with this group of students, I want to do that same thing. I want to reassess these students, but I don't want it to go to every kid in my class, just the students who are in that literacy group. So again, we're using data to create groups of students and then either provide them with the right resources, track their progress over time, reassess them. It's really, in my view, it's by just making it easy without having to bounce across a million systems, a very easy way to showcase and highlight the complete picture of student growth in one spot. Because just knowing that is going to allow me to more efficiently do my job as a teacher and ultimately improve student growth. All right. Thank you for being here. I've enjoyed the questions and the one-way discussion. I always love two-way discussions. If you have any other questions beyond this, so again, my name is Keith, and my email address, it's literally just Keith, Keith, @otus.com. And I would be more than happy to answer any other further questions. You'll be getting an email from me in just a bit with this recording. And thank you for being here. Hope you have a safe and healthy, happy rest of your day and rest of your summer. And certainly hope that we talk again soon. I expect to hear from me in just a bit. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great day.